All right, we're good to go. Very good. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to say thanks, Chris, for inviting me to share a bit of time with you guys. My name is Chris Earney. I co-lead the innovation team at the UN Refugee Agency. I'm going to just give you a bit of background to the UN Refugee Agency, or UNHCR as we're otherwise known, to give you an idea of who our customers are. And what our kind of ecosystem is for innovation. So I'm going to run through a few slides. Some of them I'm just going to skip through really quickly. But what I want to do is give you an idea of the innovation process that we use, the importance of putting the consumer at the center of our innovation process, and I'm going to give you an idea of the kind of architecture that we've put in place to enable our staff across the world to innovate. And again, how important it is for us to keep the customer at the center of our process, and how there's many different, have multiple avenues for feedback loops built into our kind of design process. So I'm gonna share my screen, which is really messy. Apologies for that. And I'm gonna try and get to a presentation for you guys. So just bear with me. All righty ho. All right, so UNHCR is the UN Refugee Agency. Our task, our mandate is to provide protection, international protection and assistance to around 64 million people around the world, which is a pretty steep task. We work with refugees, so people who have crossed an international border and they seek refuge in another country. We help internally displaced people, or IDPs, who have had to flee from violence in one part of their country and they seek safety in another part. We help stateless people, so those people who have no nationality. And we help returning refugees and returning IDPs. We operate in about 127 operations around the world, from Costa Rica through to Kenya, through to Afghanistan. We've got a staff and affiliate workforce of around 15,000 people. We work from rapid onset emergencies, and we work right the way through to durable solutions. When we talk about durable solutions, the average lifespan of a refugee experience is upwards of 21 years at this point. So if we're involved at the start, and we see you right through until your hopeful durable solution comes along, you can imagine that we're dealing with generations upon generations of people. So that gives us an awful lot of scope for innovation. Innovation across the humanitarian sphere is a big thing now. We recently came back from the World Humanitarian Summit in Turkey. Innovation was one of the key pillars of the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. It's on his radar. It's on the radar of all of the UN agencies and certainly our non-governmental organisation counterparts, such as Oxfam, such as Médecins Sans Frontières, and so on and so forth. But the reason for innovation within the sector was that we felt that we really needed to change the way that we were doing things. My organisation's been around for about 65 years. We were formed after the events of the 1930s and 40s, largely in response to a massive number of refugees within Europe itself, and we were largely legal based. As we've moved through, particularly the 90s, the events in Rwanda, the events in the Southeast Balkans, we became increasingly operational, and we saw protection as something that included shelter. It includes water, sanitation, health, education, and providing a more holistic protection response meant that, again, we had to diversify, we had to adapt to the changing circumstances and the changing needs of the world that frankly couldn't cope with the huge numbers of refugees and IDPs that were around them. So the picture I'm trying to paint is one of an organisation that's always adapted since its very, very existence. It's always been innovative. It's always encouraged creativity. But about 5 years ago, we realized that we were missing out on far too many opportunities, particularly with the private sector, particularly with non-traditional actors. And in our world, that means people who are not organizations that are not governments. So we work an awful lot with the UK government, particularly DFID. We work an awful lot with the US, with the Japanese, the Russians, etc., etc. But really 5 years ago, we started to interact a lot more closely with the private sector on efforts to innovate. So for us within UNHCR, our starting point was always to put refugees at the center of our design process, and we realized that we needed to put in some formal structures for our staff. We needed to put in some formal structures for our partners' staff, and we needed to put in formal structures for refugees to innovate with us. So what we arrived at was my team, myself, and one other fellow at the time, were charged with putting together some architecture for innovation, putting together some process, putting together some channels that would allow us to put our customers, so refugees generally, at the center of our design process. So with that, we made a ton of mistakes. We've failed projects in Lebanon, in South Sudan, in Eastern DRC. But I guess 4 years ago, we really we did quite a big lessons learned activity, and we realized the projects that largely failed the most were those where we had failed to put refugees at the center of the design process. And that means from defining what the problem is, defining what the issue is that we want to solve, right the way through to building out that product, and working out what the assumptions are that are unsafe, testing those assumptions time and time again, using rapid prototyping, low fidelity rapid prototyping, for example, in field locations such as Southeast Ethiopia, to get that user feedback and to ultimately make the products and services that we wanted to innovate on or around as relevant as possible to the end users. So in UNHCR, our main goal is to make sure that our organization can innovate with and for refugees. Noting that we work in those 127 operations around the world, noting the diversity of the operating environments, looking at a durable solution operation in Costa Rica, which has only got around 25,000 customers, I suppose, if we want to term refugees as customers, right the way through to our operations in Syria, and we're all very familiar with the millions of people who have been displaced, even in the last week, internally, but also externally. And so we have where we do innovate and where we do try and encourage our organisation to innovate. There's a huge range of operations in which we're active, and that presents opportunities, but it also presents us with quite a few challenges in Syria, not least of all the security environment. And we as an innovation team, will operate in the easiest and as well as the most challenging environments. We can talk a bit more about that later on, and what that means for some of our projects, or what it meant for some of our projects. So the way that we put an architecture in place to make sure that we've got our customers at the center of design was we largely formed around 5 pillars. We've got innovation labs. So this slide actually needs to be quite updated. We made some big changes last week, but we have thematic labs. So we have an energy lab, for example, that looks at energy solutions for refugees, whether it's lighting within homes or lighting within schools, always with the goal of bringing better protection to refugees. The reason that energy is so important, for example, if you have, we see a lot of issues around sexual assault, particularly around large refugee camps, and that's protection issue. If we have more vulnerable aspects of the population who are attacked, that presents quite I mean, that's just a glaring protection risk. So we want to make sure that we get more efficient, more widely spread energy solutions into refugee camps when we're talking about camp situations, for example. Each of these labs plays a project management role. We won't take on a project through those labs unless there's very clear there's a very clear involvement of the end users, and in this case we in UNHCR we mean refugees, we mean IDPs, and we also mean host community members within whose community the refugees seek asylum. We've got labs and they're there for very targeted themes that we need to innovate around. We have an innovation fellowship that we run once per year. We take about 25 fellows into a formal training program that lasts for a 12-month period. The formal training involves a couple of workshops throughout the year, sure, but really for us the most important aspect of the training is that we do we will mentor them through them solving a challenge within their field location and taking that through to a concrete project. At the center of their challenge and solution development, etc., is the principle of human-centered design. So we've worked a lot with the Stanford D School, and we've used a lot of their training techniques to stress the importance of putting users at the center of design. And we have this fellowship because we know that in 10 years' time, some of these innovation fellows will be leading our organization, and we want them to be those champions of innovation in the next 10, 20 years' time. So it's part of our longer term theory of change, I suppose. The third thing that we do is we do pretty intense engagement activities. Within our organization, we have what we call communications officers, and it's this really old school way of pushing out messages to the general public about what our organization does. For us, engagement is about having conversations with a very broad community, including private sector friends and colleagues, including refugee communities, including our own staff, and including operational partners within the field. Now, what we try to do with this engagement pillar is to weave it throughout all of the different pillars that we have. So we use engagement as a tool in some cases to get that feedback on projects, on processes, on some of the things that we do in the field. And so we do a lot of digital engagement, we do a lot of crowdsourcing for idea management, and so on and so forth. And I think we'll probably segue into this pillar in a little bit more detail in a couple minutes. But for us, engagement is a crucial part of our strategy. It's a crucial part of what we do, so that we make sure that we're breaking down these kind of Cold War-ish images of the United Nations as being stuffed full of middle-aged white men in suits behind high-walled in high-walled offices or in white cars cruising through the African Sahel. So we try and break down barriers within the organization and outside, including with refugees who we need to engage with a lot more closely. So engagement is a key part of what we do. The fourth thing, which really isn't about putting customers at the center of our design process, and it really is just a way to bribe people. We have a multi-million-dollar innovation fund. We provide it to operations so that they have a safe budgetary space to try out a few new approaches, and we give out between 50 and 100,000 USD to operations around the world once a year. They're allowed to fail. They're allowed to try and fail. The thing that we ensure is in place is quite a hefty amount of documentation around lessons learned at the end of the project. But we always do that at the end of the project so that people can just focus on their testing and their iteration within the whichever operation they're in. And then the fifth pillar is an innovation circle, and this is a collection of friends and colleagues from outside of the humanitarian sphere, largely from academia through to private sector organizations, and we use this innovation circle to draw in resources in terms of in terms of core capacities that we're missing within the organization that we want to make use of. Core competencies of, for example, coders at Google. Sometimes we'll phone up friends within the innovation circle who have those links there, and we can get secondments from Google to work on a data challenge, for example. Colleagues from the IKEA Foundation that we'll talk more about later on, who have expertise in flat pack shelter solutions, and we'll call out to them and get secondments from such organisations. So we also have this pillar, which again really isn't about putting refugees at the centre of the design process, but it is about how we can reach out to the rest of the world and get the best brains and get the best expertise and bring that into our organisation, and imbue that with our 65 plus years of responding to refugee crises around the world. And it's surprising what you can create together with some of these organisations. Anyway, I won't go on too much about the innovation circle. What I do want to kind of segue into is again the importance of human-centered design in everything we do, and I think that translates into your approaches around customer research, how you profile customers, some of the techniques, approaches that you employ within the private sector, and I think it's probably worth just calling this out now, that the motivations for innovating in your realm are sometimes very different to the motivations for innovating within my realm. We are not profit driven. We are a big, sluggish, horrific UN bureaucracy sometimes, and we are slow at doing some things, and not particularly efficient at others. So my environment is probably quite different to your environment. My motivation for innovating is probably, and I make a huge assumption here, so correct me later on when we actually have a conversation, is probably very different to yours. But the importance of customer satisfaction and the importance of making sure that customers are consulted throughout whatever process you follow is really, really important. The picture you've got here in front of you is this is in Dolowado, which is about 700 meters away from the Somali border in southeast Ethiopia. I spent a lot of time in this place. It's home to about 200,000 Somali refugees who were displaced in 2011 from largely south and central Somalia, so Kismayo, Mogadishu, and the rural areas in between both those cities and the Ethiopian border. And they came over en masse to this area of Ethiopia. There were a lot of deaths. It was a very unpleasant place to work for some months. But what you see just behind this group of people is what was called the Refugee Housing Unit and is now called the Better Shelter Unit. This is one of the projects that we worked on together with the IKEA Foundation, which is a philanthropic arm of IKEA, the company, and an organisation that is now called Better Shelter. From the very beginning, this was a very complicated project to run. We started with it was actually upwards of 15 companies from 6 different industries, primarily based within Sweden, and what we wanted to do was solve one of the oldest issues that our organisation has faced, and that is transitional shelter. So typically an emergency can last up to 6 months, and for those 6 months we'll use what we call the family tent, but for all intents and purposes it's a 6 to 8 person tent. And we can deploy these within, no matter where you are in the world, within 24 to 48 hours. It provides immediate shelter and dignity to refugees and other displaced people. It's a lifesaver in some places, but you shouldn't live in a tent for more than 3 months, in my opinion, but according to the guidelines, about 6 months. But it always takes some time to transition between the tent and a more durable shelter solution. And that's a problem for us, because it means that people live in undignified conditions for months and sometimes years on end in tents, in some operations, because it's so difficult to get transitional shelter solutions together. Sometimes people will have their family tent replaced with another family tent, and that's unacceptable in our view. So we wanted to solve this challenge of how we can provide a shelter that will last upwards of between 6 months and up to 5 years. So we looked at companies outside. We looked at private sector for support, and because we were working with the IKEA Foundation at that point, they connected us to very diverse range of industries in Sweden, from car manufacturers right the way through to purveyors of high tensile steel, and everything in between. So we collaborated with 15 different companies. We employed, we partnered with 3 different universities, and initially we had a little bit of money to run the project with. So it was about $5.5 million originally. And what we wanted to do as soon as possible was to take this unit that was modular in nature, that was flat packable, that could be deployed to any emergency around the world, and we wanted to get user feedback as early on in the project as possible, which is what we did, which is why we went to Colorado. Which is why we spent about 4 weeks training Somali refugees how to put the shelter up. This is why we had about 6 months of pre-consultations with this small group of people here about what it would mean to participate in this project. We had to set expectations very clear from the very beginning, and yeah, we had a very tough time. We had a very tough time with this project for a number of different reasons. Number one, I don't speak very good Somali. I speak some, but it's not great. So everything that we were doing when we were training people on the use of these shelters, even before they started living in these things, had to be done through interpreters, which immediately creates a bit of a barrier. The second constraint that we had was the location that we were working in. Not sure how familiar you guys are with Somalia and the civil war, but there's a group called Al-Shabaab who are not particularly pleasant people, and it just so happened when we started testing, we had a few nods from various security agencies and organizations that going out into the effectively Somali region of Ethiopia, with 6'5", blonde-haired, blue-eyed people from Sweden might not be such a great idea. Nevertheless, we had reassurances from other security agencies that we could find. But what it meant was that our time in the field had to be quite limited. So communication was essential, and our communication through interpreters was really became key to the success of the project. So those were 2 constraints. The third thing was just environmental constraints, and this really was, I wanted to test the shelter in one of the toughest operations in the world, because if it can work here, it can probably work in Lebanon, it can probably work in Syria, Iraq, and so on and so forth. So the third big challenge were just the conditions. It was about 45 to 50 degrees Celsius every day. It was Ramadan, so the drivers weren't drinking water throughout the day. They became quite sluggish in the afternoon, and this was we needed drivers at the time for a man of reasons, not least the security issues. It was the road conditions were terrible to get to this place. This is a camp called Hiloin. It's about an hour and a half. Take about an hour and a half on a good day from our base. The road conditions were terrible. One day we changed 23 tires just getting to this location, the testing location. So climatic conditions were tough. Fourth, our insecurity measures. So security issues are one thing. The UN security rules and mitigation measures quite another. So pushing security guys to let us stay out as long as possible, to let us to continue operating is very challenging. And then the fifth thing that is probably the most important challenge was how you build a feedback mechanism into this testing process. And I've worked with Somali populations within Somalia and also in northeast Kenya, so I'm kind of familiar with the culture, but the Swedish designers were not, and so I knew that they would miss an awful lot of crucial details throughout the 6 to 12 month testing period. So we started to use ethnographic techniques within our testing. And to do that, we worked through another organization, which was called Desert Rose Consultancy. They're based in Addis Ababa. I know them from previous projects. And we employed ethnographic techniques to get that feedback. And after the 6 months, the initial 6 month period, the feedback that we gleaned was amazing. It led to 95% of the individual component parts on that shelter being changed, altered, iterated upon, and we had a safer, stronger, cheaper shelter that could be deployed around the world. Now, that was one project that presented us with a huge amount of lessons learnt, and the project continues to evolve. So although after many iterations and much more feedback together with this group of people that you see in front of you, we also had in parallel, I wanted to test it in northern Iraq, which was a very different situation. It was more of it would be more of a test on our logistics capacity than end user acceptance or so on and so forth. And we also tried to test in northern Lebanon. Which was another very different situation. It wasn't a camp situation. It was refugees who were living in dispersed settlements, which was the primary reason for us wanting to test that. We couldn't conclude testing after we had a run-in with a couple of very large men with large guns. So we decided we wouldn't carry on testing in that area. And in actual fact, there were some issues with the Lebanese government that we needed to move. So that's one example of how we've innovated within the UN Refugee Agency. We resorted to ethnographic research. We found that gave us, in that specific situation where we had those challenges, that was deemed the most useful feedback mechanism. It's not to say it was the only technique we used. It's not to say that it was a silver bullet. It certainly wasn't. There were issues with using ethnography, and it's not to say that there weren't other successful techniques to get that customer feedback, to get that end user feedback. And it's not also to say that the project hasn't been one massive headache within our organization. It was kind of the flagship innovation project, and along with flagship or first time projects in any big organization, you come up against that reticence to change from the logistics colleagues right the way through to some of the field officers in Dolawaju. So that was one of the innovations that we worked on over here. Another innovation that we'd worked on was the ideas box, which is actually something that started within an organisation called Bibliothèques Sans Frontières, Libraries Without Borders, which was actually this project actually started with quite a famous French designer called Philippe Starck. So the solution actually already existed, and we did really bad practice of testing an existing solution within a range of field operations to see whether it would be accepted by end users, which I really don't like. But this was sort of an order from on high, and again my first reaction was, all right, let's get it into the field and get it to as many different field operations as possible in quite diverse settings. We have to build end user feedback into this project, just as we would with any other, even though we're introducing the solution a little bit later than we would have liked to. Now, for the testing of this solution, we went to Burundi. Just south of Rwanda. We're all familiar with some of the upheaval that we're seeing in Burundi now. But this testing started about 2.5-3 years ago. We had an urban population. And most refugees flee to urban areas. What you see on TV, particularly in the news of huge camps, is actually not the norm. The refugees in Burundi were an urban population, and that presents a lot of opportunities when we look at getting end user feedback, and when we look at the customers we want to test the products on, and for us. We had to do an awful lot of customer research. So we needed to know where people were. We needed to know where people were living within Bujumbura. We wanted to know we wanted to dig right down into their telecoms use, and we wanted to dig right down into their education background. Now, the way that you can do that within our organisation is that when you become a refugee, you also become registered with our organisation and or with government counterparts. So you build up a profile of families. You get the basic bio data. You know who's in the family, who the mother is, who the father is, and so on and so forth. And you also, there are different levels of registration that you go through, but ultimately you want to build up a profile of your constituents, your customers, your clients, that goes right down into their livelihoods activities. So are they a teacher? Are they a doctor? Are they a lawyer? Are they a construction worker? And so on and so forth. And what you can do is use that registration database as a bit of research on your customers, and you can also use that to profile the types of people that you are trying to innovate for and with. So we did a lot of profiling when it came to the testing of the ideas box in Burundi. Again, this was one of our first projects that got big quickly, and again we had a lot of teething problems with it. But those teething problems were largely institutional. And they were not related to customer satisfaction. In actual fact, the project became a real success within Burundi, and we joined up partners. So we joined the Ideas Box team up with the IKEA Foundation team to see if we could actually get some of the packing issues sorted out, so that we could deploy more of these boxes to more situations more cheaply. And this is a solution that basically provides I want to say a school in a box, but it's not. It's more than a school in a box. It's more like a community centre in a box. So recognising the importance of connectivity and access to the World Wide Web, etc., to displaced communities. So that was the ideas box, and it gave us great success in Burundi, and then Tanzania. We went back to the drawing board in terms of the size and the weight of the box, because certainly the feedback that we got from the end users was that it's just a bit too heavy, it's a bit too cumbersome even within urban environments. So that may be prohibitive in some of the more rural African locations that we've also worked, such as northern Uganda. We're just getting ready to deploy to support the South Sudan emergency. And another interesting project that we worked on together with this group of people, actually also in Doloado in southeast Ethiopia, was community light production. For this, we also employed ethnography, because we faced the same problems actually that we faced with the Better Shelter project, and we took the lessons learned from that, and when we went back a year later to deploy A Litre of Light, which is actually an NGO based out of the Philippines, Manila, when we went back with A Litre of Light to test out this project on our customers down in Southeast Ethiopia, we took all the lessons learned in terms of customer feedback and so on and so forth. So those were just to give you a bit of an overview of some of the projects and how we've. I mean a very, very crude and brief overview. I apologise if it were a bit too brief and a bit too crude, but I want to head towards questions and answers and conversations as much as possible. The last thing before we open it up was our crowdsourcing platform that we use here at UNHCR. We use this to gather ideas from across those 127 operations. We gather ideas from refugees, from private sector partners, from academic partners, and from our staff. And what we do is we'll present one or two challenges that one operation would like support in solving. Some of them are open to the public, some of them are to a more discreet group, and we use this platform to gather the best brains the organization's got to solve one field challenge, whether that's presented by a driver in South Sudan, a protection officer in Kabul, or a durable solutions operation in Costa Rica. We use this to farm ideas and then to use that crowd to decide what the best ideas are. And they'll be looking at feasibility, they'll be looking at things that have been tried in the past, they'll be looking at their own experiences with particular projects. They can exchange good practices between each other and have conversations about stuff. And it's a great leveler within our organization, because it doesn't matter whether you're a representative or a driver, you're on the same platform and you're having a conversation about how to solve a particular challenge. That's incredibly powerful, and particularly in a quite conservative organization that the United Nations is. And so this is a really powerful tool for us to kind of narrow down which ideas would be implemented, which ideas we want to invest our time, our resources into transforming from ideas to realities in field operations. So this is one of the tools that we use. In actual fact, we've got way more than 20,000 users at the moment, and way more than 1,000 some ideas. We've launched around 15 to 18 challenges now within and outside of UNHCR. Organizations come to us now to ask us if they can use the platform, if we can run a challenge to kind of farm ideas for their own organizations, which is quite interesting. But this is a great tool to get the brain power of 15,000 plus people to start thinking about, a shelter challenge or a driver's challenge or a protection issue, and it's a good tool. It's been a really interesting experience having our own staff kind of vet ideas and be very positive and take part in those conversations that it's very difficult to have, frankly, if you're a whatever, a logistician in Sri Lanka, and normally you wouldn't be talking to the protection officer in Baghdad, but this platform certainly connects the innovators and the creative minds around the organization. So with that said, maybe Chris, it would be a good idea to open up for a couple of questions and some conversations. With everything that we do, we try to be as transparent as possible. So we put most of our projects up on the website. You see the URL there. Feel free to go on, have a look. If you've got questions, then Chris can put my email address out there, or get a hold of us on our social media challenges. We're very open, and we try to be very responsive. Over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much. Maybe if you close your presentation down, and we'll have the two screens and we can see each other. Brilliant.
Cool.
So I'm sure there'll be a few questions, but maybe I'll just kick off a couple. You're talking about the ethnographic research that you were doing, and I was wondering, given some of the security challenges and things that you had, how did that actually work? I mean, I think the learning will be actually similar for both our teams, because is it that you're getting people to write their own diaries, journals, and then if so, how do you get that back? Is it uploaded? Is it or is it observational research? How does that work?
Yeah, it was a mixture actually. So we had we partnered with Desert Rose because they have ethnically Somali well, some of them are ethnically Somali workforce. So some of it was participatory observation. So they were living within the camps and made friends with the guys who were testing those shelters. Some of it was written feedback, but Somalia's are a more oral society. So actually sitting down and having a cup of tea or coffee is you end up getting, yeah, and it's crude stuff, right? But it's effective. So you have that cup of tea or coffee, and actually one of the guys who was testing the shelter for us is a teacher in the local school, and that gave us inroads that was not planned, but it gave us insights from children, and we hadn't actually considered them as end users, as stupid as that. So yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I had a couple of other that came out of the talk. One was you said you were collecting biometrics data, which I guess doesn't seem so crazy when you think about it, but actually surprised me. But I mean, you said you were using that data, but interestingly, as we tie that back to our own environment, we collect a lot of data about people. And often the question is, how do you use that data? So are you using that data, for instance, like Syrian refugees streaming into Europe, and you're fingerprinting or at least assimilating them into families or community groups? Are you sharing that data back with governments and security agencies?
So it depends on the it depends on the operation. It depends on many things actually. If I just look at a more regular situation, let's look sub-Saharan Africa. Let's look at South Sudanese coming into Uganda. We register refugees. We have to register refugees. It allows us to assign resources, whether it's blankets, tents, sanitary items, etc., and we use it to get the right things to the right people at the right time. So we use it in that respect. We also use it for lobbying purposes. So having all of this bio data gives us very rich profile of the various groups of people. So when we go to our executive committee in October, we know which countries are hosting the most refugees, what type of profile of refugees they are. We can start to lobby and advocate for the right to work, because we know that you have a certain number of lawyers, etc., etc. We know what the economic benefits of hosting refugees can be. So we use it for a whole range of reasons. We're not particularly good at it. We're sitting on a data goldmine within our own organization, and we're not particularly good at making the different data sets talk to each other. And secondly, we're not so good at making decisions based on data. We're very good at intuition, and there's definitely a place for intuition in terms of what we do. But I mean, my team, I'm kicking my team to get data, and actually moving into big data and social media analysis is something that I'm definitely pushing them to do. But we're just not so good at doing it. When it comes to governments and how much we share in the Europe response, we get registration data primarily from the Greek government, from the guys on the islands, and then they share it with us, and we share it with other governments. When people do what's called a secondary movement, so they've already sought asylum in one country, and then they want to move on to, say, Germany, Austria, Sweden, Finland, then they'll be registered again by those competent authorities. In Jordan, we've registered hundreds of thousands of people, and sure, the Jordanian government want to know who are in their camps, particularly when we look at issues of national security, and depending on the operation, we don't want bad guys in camps. Every refugee camp and setting should have should be of a civilian nature. So we don't want the wrong people in those settlements, because it's bad for refugee protection, which is what we're here to provide or support the provision of.
Yeah, cool.
Yes. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep.
Oh, you can hear me. Hi, I'm Thomas, I'm the lead designer at Graphite. Got two questions. First is, have you managed the impact of doing rapid prototyping or even picking the right solution? Because for us, when we do a prototype, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't work. All we're losing is money. But I'm guessing for you, if you're like doing it somewhere, then it must be, if it goes wrong, then there's lives and all that kind of stuff. So even picking the solution to get prototyped must go through like quite a lengthy process, I imagine. So,
okay, I mean, on prototyping, we sort of trying to impress upon our colleagues that, bias towards action. So we're really looking at low fidelity prototypes as early on as possible, testing your assumption, a broad set of assumptions early on. So for us, I mean, if we're employing the logic that if you prototype early and you prototype quickly and you prototype low fidelity, then you're probably going to save yourself money down the line. We've got a long experience of thinking we've got perfect solutions and then parachuting them into the field locations. They don't work, and then we end up spending upwards of $50 million to try and rectify. So for us, I mean, that's the argument I use with my big boss, and he seems happy with it so far, because it makes sense.
Yeah, the second question is about sharing knowledge. Maybe I missed it, but you're sharing skills, but what about sharing the actual design thinking process, so that instead of just going, like shipping some Swedish designers into Africa, and then they do it and then they go home, why not teaching that design thinking to the locals, then they can just carry on and go on with their own solutions? Yeah,
and it's a really good point. And yeah, I failed to mention what we did do with these guys. So in terms of the skills and expertise from the Better Shelter team, I mean, they've been working with two people from our own shelter and settlement section here in Geneva, and they work side by side. And so what we find when we work with non-traditional actors is that there's this exchange of knowledge which works both ways. So our shelter team has learned an awful lot about the design process and Swedish industry, bizarrely enough. But on their side, they've learned an awful lot about what it means to respond to refugee emergencies. So as we've gone through the project, now, I mean, they're just as much experts on refugee shelter solutions as anyone in UNHCR. So it works both ways, and it makes for a tighter relationship moving forward. When it comes to the field operations, more or less the same thing. We've got shelter experts down in Dolo who are in day-to-day contact with the guys from Better Shelter, and then with the end users, so the refugees in this case. There are a number of carpenters amongst the kind of test group, and they've actually taken some of the techniques from the Better Shelter team and started to employ them in their own businesses in Colorado, which is something we hadn't planned for, put it that way.
Pretty cool. That was it. The only things I was going to say is that we've got like probably the greatest mind in digital are working on being able to order toilet paper by pressing the button. And it's a shame they're not just working with you instead of doing that.
Yeah, I did actually think when you're talking about the how do you get feedback back from folks out in the field, and I was sort of half imagining you were going to say, put buttons inside on the metal, and then of course you got pirates all around and people inform economies and things like that. But I did actually imagine the kind of the Amazon Daz button, like on there. Rob, you got that?
Yeah, great. Chris, thanks very much. I'm Rob from Graphite, I'm Managing Director here. I really appreciate your time. A couple of questions. One, in the private sector, we come across fairly frequently the desire to just launch, just get it out so in front of the end customers, all of them all at the same time. It sounds to me, though, that the UN more lean towards more testing than rushing it out. Would you say there's a balance there that you have had to work around and educate people on?
Yeah, and we still haven't got it right. This better shelter project is, because it was the first time, just like children, the firstborn always gets it rougher, right, from the parents. I mean, with this one, with this project, it was a real. I mean, internally, the politics around the project were precisely that. The people who just wanted to launch, let's get it done. We think it's the right thing. Let's push it out to as many field operations as possible. And then the other people who just wanted to test and test and test and test. And it's a balance. We'll probably never get it right, but we're definitely getting to more of a sweet spot. If you're facing the same in the private sector as well, then not sure whether to feel relief or whether to just stop gently in the corner here.
Cool. And the second question is the next step. So once you've innovated, you've got to beta, or how do you know that this is good enough for deployment? And then how do you then deploy it? Who owns the IP for what you've got? And how do you? And is it still a commercial thing, or is it I don't know, more more selfless than that with these organisations?
Yeah, I mean, next steps is always next. Okay, if you want to get anything through our organisation and sort of have it deployed properly, there are probably three things that you need. Or at least three areas that become enablers or not. Sometimes it's a combination of all three, sometimes it's just one or two. The first thing you need to have is really good communication around what the thing is, and that means warts and all. So where there are flaws, where there have been problems with testing, you need to use communication to be transparent, so that people feel comfortable with whatever product or service or solution, process, etc., it is. So communication is a key thing that we use. Second thing is money. People don't want to reassign scarce resources to risky projects. So you have to try and make money available for operations around the world to use your product or your service. And then the third thing is policy. In some cases, particularly when we're looking at wider adoption, you need to give representatives and decision makers, key decision makers, budget holders around the organisation the policy tool, so that they know they should be using this better shelter unit over a family tent in this location. Now that doesn't answer your question on when do we make the decision that it's good enough, and the reason I'm not going to answer that question is because I don't know the answer, because we haven't ever got that. I don't think we've ever got that 100% right. I think we've used the good enough principle on a number of occasions, and there are definitely things that we've put out there that could be better than they actually are if we spend a bit more time on the field testing, for example, on the prototyping. But there are always constraints, and do I want to spend more money on developing this thing to get a couple wrinkles ironed out, or do I want to spend that money, or do I want to give that money to a field operation so that they can actually purchase the thing, and then we're going to discover, we're going to get that end user feedback in any case, and make the changes that we need to. It's a little bit of a balancing act, and it should continue to be, because it means that we're improving as an organisation when it comes to making those decisions.
Yeah, great. And finally, who owns the designs?
So sorry, I forgot about that. So for this particular project, if we're talking about the Better Shelter unit, actually the designs will be open source. So we're releasing the designs, I think, next year. What we want to happen is the industry competition kicks in, so that the price goes down and down and down and down, and hopefully the product will evolve and improve. So we want the markets to do their jobs there, and that's not always the case. with everything that we do, we try to make sure that the IP is released, and that as many people as possible can benefit from that. In some cases, we just don't. We've worked with large logistics companies, parcel delivery companies, and they're not going to release the IP around the product. We're actually fine with that. Because we're fine with that because we're essentially just adapting. They're paying to adapt one of their products for our environment, and we're happy that they're doing that. And we're not investing the money in making that happen.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Right. Any more from anybody else? No. Last one. All right. So last one, Chris, and appreciate your time. You mentioned about the crowdsourcing platforms at the end there. In terms of gathering ideas and things like that. I was interested, you've got 15, 18 challenges out there now. Are you paying people for their input, for their ideas? Or is the community so engaged that they're wanting to solve these challenges for you anyway?
Yeah, so we're paying them. We're paying them to, I mean, we can't give people money. We're just not allowed to. Our human resources, our performance appraisal systems, we're not based on bonuses. We're based on really, really shoddy appraisals of each other that are never used. So what we try to do is we will highlight winners, and it's really, really, really crude, but we want to put the spotlight on the winner of the challenge. We want to do an awful lot of internal communication around whomever that winner is. We want to give them exposure to the highest levels of the organization, and in a hierarchy such as UNHCR, that becomes something that is very powerful because we're quite nepotistic, and we're not necessarily a meritocracy. So people see the gains here, but that, I mean, that's me being the cynical aid worker that I am. In actual fact, I do think we've got. I think the metrics and data show that our level of engagement is very high and actually quite genuine. And we're starting to feel a change in the culture around us. Not as a result of only our efforts, but certainly by encouraging people to be creative, encouraging people to take that brave step forward and put their idea down, or just to phone me up and have a conversation about, I don't know, big data in the Europe crisis, then we are starting to see a change. And platforms such as UNHCR Ideas are certainly contributing to that. But we just can't pay people bonuses for good ideas, which is such a shame.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chris. Really appreciate it. Let me stop this.